Evening, good to have you here. I want to talk about Breaking Bad tonight, and I want to do it slowly because there's no reason to rush, and honestly, the material doesn't reward rushing. Specifically, I want to talk about the plot holes, the cracks, the bits that don't quite line up when you look at them directly, which is a strange thing to say about this show in particular because Breaking Bad has spent the last decade or so carrying a very particular reputation. It's the one people call flawless. It's the one that gets brought up whenever someone's complaining about a different show falling apart in its final season. It's the one that stuck the landing. And that reputation is precisely why poking at it is fun rather than mean. Nobody goes looking for continuity errors in a show they don't respect. You don't sit up at 1:30 in the morning working out the load-bearing weight of a plot point unless the show has already convinced you that the plot points were load-bearing in the first place. So everything I'm about to do tonight is, in a roundabout way, a compliment, worth saying up front, because I'm going to spend the next couple of hours listing things Breaking Bad got wrong, and I'd hate for anyone to think I've got a grievance. I don't. I think it's one of the best things anyone has ever put on television. I've watched it more times than is entirely reasonable, and I will watch it again. 62 episodes across 5 seasons. A writer's room that was famously, almost pathologically obsessive about continuity, to the point where people who worked there have described the process as being closer to solving a puzzle than writing a story. They'd write themselves into a corner deliberately and then spend a fortnight arguing about how to get out. And even with all of that, even with that level of care, there are seams. There are always seams. That's not a failure. That's just what happens when you tell a story that long with human beings doing the telling. Now, before we get properly into it, I want to set up one distinction because it's going to save us both a lot of time and I'll be leaning on it all night. There's a difference between a plot hole, an unexplained, and a convenience. A plot hole is when the logic actually breaks. Two things are true in the show and they cannot both be true. Somebody knows something they have no way of knowing. Somebody forgets something they'd never forget. And unexplained is when the logic works perfectly well. The show just declined to show you the working. There's a version of events that holds up completely. You're simply not given it on screen, and you have to build it yourself in the gap between two scenes. And a convenience is when everything is technically possible, but it only works because nobody in the room asks the obvious question. The plan succeeds because the story needs it to succeed, and the characters politely decline to notice. Most of what people call Breaking Bad plot holes are the second category. A lot of the rest are the third. There are a few real ones, and I'll flag them clearly when we get there, because I think they're the most interesting ones, and they deserve their moment. But the honest headline is that this show is much tighter than the internet gives it credit for, and also that the internet has a slightly unfair standard for it, which is a fun thing to be the victim of. Here's a detail I like. In November of 2025, more than 12 years after the show ended, Vince Gilligan sat down on a podcast whose entire premise is arguing about plot holes and answered a question about a scene in a desert in season 5. 12 years, he's still turning up. He's still litigating his own show. There's something quite charming about a man who will get on a microphone in his 60s to explain, one more time, how a DEA agent found a specific patch of sand. We'll get to that one. It's the famous one. But I'm not going to build towards it because I'm not building towards anything tonight. We're going to wander through this roughly in the order the show happens because that's how memory works on a rewatch anyway. You don't think about Gus Fring and then think about the pilot. You go forward gently and things surface as they surface. The subscribe button costs nothing and it does move the needle for a channel this size. That's the entire pitch. I won't raise it again, so we'll start where everyone starts, with a man turning 50 and getting some very bad news. The money question greets you at the door. It's the first thing anyone says when they're being clever about Breaking Bad at a party, and it's worth dealing with immediately because if we don't, it'll sit there all night. Walter White turns 50 on the 7th of September, 2008. He gets a lung cancer diagnosis. He's a high school chemistry teacher working a second job at a car wash. He's got a pregnant wife and a teenage son with cerebral palsy. and he does the arithmetic on what his family will have when he's gone and decides the answer is to cook methamphetamine. That's the engine, that's the whole show starting up. And roughly 4 episodes later, his old friend Elliot Schwartz offers him a job. On the spot, in his own house, at his own birthday party, with health insurance attached and no strings whatsoever. Then Gretchen offers to simply pay for the treatment outright. Just pay for it. Write the check, no repayment, no conditions. Walt says no. So the objection writes itself. Why is there a show? Why doesn't he take the money? And I understand why people reach for that, because on the face of it, it does look like the writers left a door open that the plot has to pretend isn't there. Except it isn't a plot hole. It's the entire thing. It's the load-bearing wall of the whole series. Walt doesn't take the money because taking the money would mean admitting that he needs it, and that Elliot has it, and that the reason Elliot has it and he doesn't is a story Walt has been telling himself wrong for 20 years. Gray matter technologies is worth billions. Walt sold his share for $5,000. He spent 2 decades watching a company built partly on his work get very rich without him while he explains covalent bonds to teenagers who aren't listening. The trouble is that the show knows this and refuses to say it for a very long time. It shows you a man saying no to free money, and it lets you sit there confused about it for the better part of 4 seasons before it gives you enough of the gray matter backstory to make the refusal legible. Which is a real choice, and I think it's the right one, but it does mean that an awful lot of first-time viewers spend season 1 convinced the writers forgot the offer happened. That's not a hole. That's a delayed payoff. That's so delayed it looks like an oversight while you're inside it. Since we're on the subject of money, there's the insurance thing, which people have been poking at since 2008. Walt is a public school teacher in New Mexico. He's a state employee. State employees have health plans. Reasonably decent ones, historically. So how is a man with a state health plan being financially destroyed by a cancer diagnosis to the point where crime is the only available answer? And the show does address this, it really does. The plan is mediocre. The oncologist Skylar wants, the good one is out of network. There are deductibles. There's the specific American horror of being technically insured and still facing a bill that ends your family. All of that is in the script. The problem is that it's addressed quietly, in ordinary conversational lines, in the middle of scenes about other things. And the loud version of the objection has comfortably outlived the quiet version of the answer, which is a fascinating little case study in how this works, actually. A lot of the time, a plot hole doesn't mean the show failed to explain something. It means the show explained it in one line, at normal volume, while something more interesting was happening and nobody heard it. Once you notice that pattern, you start seeing it everywhere, and not just in this show. I'll say this though, even with the insurance explained, the maths of the pilot is doing a bit of work. Walt sits down with a pen and calculates what he needs. He arrives at $737,000, mortgage, tuition, cost of living for his family for a set number of years. It's a lovely scene, that. Very Walt. The man is dying and his instinct is to build a spreadsheet. And you could pick at the figure, you could ask about the car wash, about Skylar's income, about Elliot, about literally any of the 15 normal options a person in that position would exhaust before deciding to partner with a former student in a camper van. But you don't, because Bryan Cranston is playing a man who has decided, and you can see the deciding happen behind his eyes. And the arithmetic is not really arithmetic, it's permission. He's giving himself permission and dressing it up as a number. And here's a fun detail about the partnership itself, since we're at the beginning. Walt picks Jesse because Jesse is the only criminal he knows. That's it. That's the reason. He sees him going out of a window during a DEA ride-along and recognizes him from a class years earlier. And the entire structure of the show is built on a man having exactly one contact in an entire industry. Which is fine, and which is also very funny when you consider what Jesse actually brings to it. He's a small-time cook, working out of his aunt's house, making a product he calls chili pea. He has two associates, and their names are Badger and Skinny Pete. He's not a distributor. He doesn't have a network. He has a caravan he bought off a bloke. Walt, an actual genius with a Nobel-adjacent research background, teams up with the least competent person available and stays teamed up with him for 2 years through everything, past the point where he has access to a genuine international supply chain and a laboratory the size of a swimming pool. The show turns that into the emotional spine of the entire series, which is a magic trick. The convenience becomes the heart. Walt keeps Jesse because he can't not keep Jesse. And by the end, you understand that the man built an empire, and the only thing in it he ever actually wanted was somebody to be impressed by him. But underneath the emotional truth of that, structurally, it's still a man with one phone number. Now, let's talk about Tuco, because this one is my favorite of the early ones, and it's the purest example of a certain type of crack. Early in season 1, Tuco Salamanca beats Jesse half to death in a room above a shop and explains the terms of the local drug economy to him. Nobody moves crystal meth in Albuquerque but Tuco. That's the line, that's the claim. Tuco is the distribution. Gus Fring exists. Gus has existed for about 20 years at that point. Gus is running the largest, most sophisticated methamphetamine distribution operation in the Southwest, out of a chicken restaurant, with an industrial laundry sitting on top of a super lab. Gus is, as we'll get to, the single most established figure in that entire supply chain. And he's not a rival. Tuco has failed to notice. He's an associate of the cartel that Tuco's own family serves. Hector Salamanca has been in business with these people for decades, so Tuco's statement is not just wrong, it's the kind of wrong that a man in his position could not possibly be. Reddit loves this one. It comes up on every list. And I think the honest answer is that it's a genuine artifact in the archaeological sense. Gus hadn't been invented yet when that line was written. There was no Gus. There was a show about a man cooking meth in a caravan and a local psychopath who wanted the product, and the idea that there would eventually be a fast food kingpin operating a subterranean laboratory was not yet a thought anybody had had. And I find that reassuring, weirdly. I like it. It's proof that the show was being made rather than executed from a blueprint. There's a version of Breaking Bad where every line in season 1 was written by people who already knew about Gus, and that version would be more airtight and considerably less alive. What you're actually hearing when Tuco says nobody moves meth in Albuquerque but him is a writer's room that hasn't decided the future yet. That's what a writer's room looks like from the outside, when you're standing at a distance of 15 years and squinting. There's a related one about the mariachi band, but that belongs in the next bit, so I'll leave it. One more thing about the premise before we move on, because it's been rattling around my head for years. The show's fundamental proposition is that Walter White is a genius, not clever, not good at chemistry, a genius with a mind so exceptional that his ordinary life is an insult to it. That's why the meth is pure. That's why the plans work. That's why Gus wants him. Every plot beat downstream depends on Walt being the smartest man in any given room. And yet the show also, quite deliberately, keeps showing you that his plans are mostly held together by luck and other people. The mercury fulminate works because Tuco doesn't know what mercury fulminate looks like. The magnet works and also doesn't. The train heist works and then a child rides over a hill. Walt survives Gus because Hector Salamanca hates Gus more than he hates Walt. Over and over, the genius produces a plan, and then the world produces a complication, and the plan half survives on the strength of something Walt didn't account for. I don't think that's a contradiction. I think that's the most honest thing in the show. Genius doesn't mean control. It just means you're better at describing the thing that's happening to you than everyone else in the room. And Walt is spectacularly good at that. He can explain at length, with real authority, why the thing that just went catastrophically wrong was always going to be fine, which brings us quite naturally to the people whose job it was to catch him. Hank Schrader is one of the great television detectives, and I want to establish that before I start taking him apart, because the taking apart is going to be a bit brutal and it's not deserved. Dean Norris does something in this role that I don't think gets enough credit. He plays a man whose entire personality is a defense mechanism. The volume, the jokes, the racist banter with Gomez that he clearly doesn't fully mean, the beer brewing in the garage, all of it is scaffolding around someone who is quietly frightened of the work he does and quietly brilliant at it. The panic attacks in season 2 are the tell. And the moment in the bathroom with the Whitman book, where the whole architecture of his life reassembles itself in about 4 seconds of a man sitting on a toilet, is one of the best pieces of acting in the entire run. He does almost nothing. He just becomes a different person while holding a book. So, with all that said, the gas mask. In the pilot, Walt and Jesse cook in the desert. Things go badly, and Walt leaves a gas mask behind in the sand. Sometime later, children find it. The DEA collects it. Hank ends up with it. The mask came from J.P. Wynne High School's chemistry department. It has an inventory number on it. Walt's own lab is missing equipment. Round-bottom flasks, a Keldol flask, the mask. Walt has to concoct a story about a break-in to cover the gap in his own inventory. And he tells the story to the school, and the school is presumably at some point in contact with the police about a burglary. And there is a gas mask from that school sitting in a DEA evidence room attached to a mobile methamphetamine laboratory. Hank jokes about it to Walt at the dinner table. He says something to the effect of, "Wouldn't it be funny if the meth cook turned out to be someone from your school? Nobody follows the paper trail." Across the show's 5 seasons, Hank quickly connects the gas mask found at a cook site to J.P. Wynne High School. And this is not a subtle thread. This is not a thing you need a detective to find. This is a serial number and a phone call. That's a real one. That's a proper hole. And I'm very fond of it because it's so early and so brazen that I think it functions almost as a warning about how the show's going to operate. The DEA in this series is not a competent institution. It's a competent man inside an incompetent institution. And the institution keeps handing him things and not noticing it's handed him anything. While we're here, the RV. Walt and Jesse drive a 1986 Fleetwood Bounder around a mid-sized American city for the better part of 2 seasons. It's beige, it has a distinctive stripe. It is, and I cannot stress this enough, the least anonymous vehicle available to purchase. They park it outside houses, they drive it to the desert on a schedule. Skinny Pete knows about it. Badger knows about it. Combo knows about it. Half of Albuquerque's low-level dealing community has at some point been in or near that caravan, and a fair few of them end up in custody. Fine, moving on. Now, the mariachi band. I said I'd come back to it. Early in season 2, there's a cold open. A narco corrido, a Mexican ballad performed by a band about Heisenberg. It's called Negro y Azul. It's a superb piece of television. It's shot like a music video, and it exists to tell you one thing very economically. The cartel knows. Word has traveled south. There's a blue product in Albuquerque and a name attached to it, and the people who move drugs across that border are singing about it, which raises 2 questions, one big and one small. The small one is where that band went. They appear once, they sing an entire song about the plot, and they are never seen or mentioned again. Somebody wrote that song in universe. Somebody knew enough to write it. And then they wandered off into the desert, and the show never followed up. I think about them sometimes. The big one is Gus. If the cartel knows about Heisenberg early in season 2, Gus knows about Heisenberg early in season 2. Gus is an associate of that cartel. Gus's entire operational model is knowing things before other people know them. He's a man who has spent 20 years constructing an information advantage and maintaining it with almost supernatural discipline. So why does it take Gus so long to come and find Walt? Why is there this whole elaborate business of Saul making an approach? And the audition with Apollos Hermanos, and Gus watching from a distance and deciding whether this man is worth the risk. Gus should have known who Walt was, and roughly where he was, and exactly what he was making months earlier from a song. The show's answer, sort of, is that Gus was watching and waiting and testing, which is in character. Gus does nothing quickly. But it's an answer that gets applied afterwards rather than one the show establishes at the time, and the timeline is doing a fair bit of quiet stretching to make it hold. And then there's Mike, right? This is the one. If you ask me for the single best plot hole in Breaking Bad, the one that survives every attempt to explain it away, it's Mike Ehrmantraut never running a background check on Walter White. Mike is a former Philadelphia police officer. Mike is functionally an intelligence operation with a face. His entire value to Gus is that he finds things out. He surveils people. He follows people. He sits in cars for 11 hours photographing a warehouse. He knows about Jesse's girlfriend. He knows about Walt's marriage. He knows about the car wash. He knows where everyone lives. In Better Call Saul, we watch him do this work for years before Walt ever exists. And the man is thorough to the point of being unpleasant about it. And Walter White's brother-in-law is the lead DEA agent on methamphetamine in Albuquerque. Not a distant relative, not a cousin twice removed. Sunday lunch, beers in the garden. The man is at Walt's dinner table with his wife every other week. This is not information you'd need to dig for. This is information you'd get from about 9 minutes with a public record search and one afternoon parked outside a house. Gus finds out eventually and reacts about how you'd expect. But by then, Walt has been inside the organization for a long time. And there's no version of Mike, as the show has drawn him, who takes on a new employee at that level of exposure and doesn't establish who the man's family is on day one. I've heard the defenses. Gus wanted Walt regardless, and the check happened, and they took the risk knowingly. Maybe. But the show never says that. And if that's the answer, then the reveal of Hank's existence lands very differently than the show plays it. It plays it as news. It plays it as a problem that has just arrived. And it can't have been news. That's a hole. That's a lovely, clean, unfixable hole. And it sits right in the middle of the most competent character in the series. Now, before we leave Hank, there's the car park. 1 minute. The Salamanca cousins come for him, and Gus makes a phone call from a payphone with his voice disguised and gives Hank 1 minute of warning. And what follows is possibly the most frightening 4 minutes of television I've ever sat through. Hank has no gun. He's just been suspended. And he fights 2 men who have never lost a fight with a car door and an idea and a great deal of luck. And he wins, barely, and he's never the same afterwards. It's flawless. There's nothing to pick at in it. But look at the shape of it from a distance, and something interesting happens. Hank survives because Gus warned him. Gus warned him because Gus wanted the cousins occupied and Hank alive. Because a dead DEA agent brings heat, and a distracted cartel serves Gus's 20-year plan. Every good thing that happens to Hank Schrader across 5 seasons is downstream of a decision made by Walter White, the man he's ultimately trying to catch. And Hank never knows. He goes to his grave in a desert, not knowing that the reason he was alive to get there was a chicken restaurant manager doing sums. That's not a hole. I just find it unbearable, and I wanted to say it out loud. Since we're on the subject of things the police somehow have. Gail Boetticher's karaoke video. Gail is murdered in his own apartment at the end of season 3. Later, in season 4, Hank shows Walt a video of Gail in his flat, alone, singing Major Tom into a camera. It's a beautiful, awful scene. Walt watches this gentle, ridiculous, harmless man be delightful, and then has to sit there and perform mild interest for his brother-in-law, having ordered the man's death. Where did that video come from? The show doesn't say. It actually explains that Hank got Gail's karaoke video as evidence from a murder case file he was asked to review. And I want to be fair here because I set up the distinction at the start, and this is a textbook example of it. There's a perfectly obvious answer. The DEA seized Gale's computer during a homicide investigation. They went through his files and the video was on it. That's not a stretch, that's just police work. But the show plays the video like evidence being presented. It doesn't establish where it came from, and because Gale was reclusive and involved in serious crime, the alternative explanation that he had uploaded it somewhere public doesn't sit right either. So you get this small gap where the obvious answer is available but unstated, and a decade of people going, hang on, how did they get that? That's an unexplained, not a whole. But it's a good demonstration of why the two get confused so often. The show didn't spend 3 seconds on it, and so the 3 seconds became a discourse. And then, on the other side of the ledger, there's Leaves of Grass. I want to name this because otherwise this whole section sounds like an attack, and because it's the reason the show has the reputation it has. Gale gives Walt a copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. It has an inscription in it. To my other favorite, W.W. Gale writes it in season 3, out of genuine affection, because he thinks he's found a kindred spirit, and because he has no idea what's coming. It's played as a small, warm moment between two chemists who like each other. That book then sits in the show, physically, for 2.5 seasons. Walt keeps it. Walt keeps it because he's sentimental about being admired, which is the truest thing about him. And in season 5, Hank picks it up off a stack of magazines in Walt's bathroom and reads the inscription, and the entire series reorganizes itself around a piece of set dressing that had been sitting in plain view since 2010. That's not luck. That's not a writer's room getting away with something. That's a group of people planting an object 2.5 years early and having the nerve to leave it there. So when I say the show has holes, I want that held alongside this. The same show that couldn't connect a gas mask to a serial number also buried a book in a bathroom in 2010 and detonated it in 2013. Both things are true. They're both what happens when people make something over 6 years, which is a decent place to leave the DEA for a bit, because there's someone else who is watching Walt the whole time and being much better at it. The man with the chicken restaurant. Giancarlo Esposito does something in this part that I've never really seen anyone else manage, which is that he plays stillness as an activity. He's not calm, Cam is passive. He's holding something down constantly with visible effort that you can only see if you look for it. And the effort never slips except twice in 4 seasons, and both times it's devastating. The Los Polos Hermanos performance is the bit I love most. The way he moves behind the counter, the way he wipes a table. There's a whole sequence where he's cleaning up after Walt has been in the restaurant staring at him. And he's doing the manager thing, the ordinary, attentive customer service thing, while a man across the room is silently threatening him. And he just keeps wiping. He's so good at being a restaurant manager that you understand immediately why nobody has ever caught him. He's not hiding behind a chicken shop. He's genuinely running a chicken shop. The hiding is a side effect of the competence, so it's a bit disorienting when he does things that don't add up. The parking garage first, end of season 4. Walt has attached a pipe bomb to Gus's Volvo in a hospital car park. Gus comes out of the hospital, walks across the concrete toward his car, and then stops. Just stops. He looks at it, he looks around. And then he turns and walks away, and he leaves the car sitting there, and Walt is on a rooftop with a detonator watching his entire plan evaporate. People call this a sixth sense, Gus the psychic. And it's a fair objection on the face of it because there's no shot of him spotting anything. He doesn't clock a wire, he doesn't see Walt. He just knows. I'll give you the defensible reading because I think it holds. Gus has been watching Walt for weeks by this point. He's had Tyrus on him. He knows Walt has been erratic, cornered, dangerous. He has just come from a hospital where the Salamanca's cousin business has played out. He is at the absolute peak of his alertness. And the car park is empty and quiet in a way that a car park at that hour shouldn't be. What he's reading isn't the bomb. What he's reading is the shape of the situation. It's behavioral, not psychic. That works. That's how careful people actually operate, and it's how Mike operates constantly, and nobody complains about that. But the show shoots it as intuition. It's filmed as a premonition, with the pause and the stare and the silence, and it invites you to read it as something more than pattern recognition. So the objection isn't really about whether it's possible, it's about the direction the camera is pointing. Now, the bell. I love this one because it's one of the rare cases where the internet's complaint has a clean answer, and the answer is better than the complaint. The setup. Walt persuades Hector Salamanca, a man who despises him, to help kill Gus, on the grounds that Hector despises Gus more. Enemy of my enemy. Walt straps a pipe bomb to the underside of Hector's wheelchair and wires it to the bell. Hector goes to the DEA and spells out abuse at Hank for a bit, which is a spectacular scene and one of the funniest things in the show. And it works exactly as intended, because Gus hears that Hector went to the DEA and concludes Hector has become an informant. Gus goes to Casa Tranquila to kill him personally. Tyrus sweeps the room first. Tyrus sweeps it thoroughly. He finds nothing. And the objection is, how does a professional sweep a room and miss a pipe bomb strapped to a wheelchair? The answer is that a bug sweep detects transmissions. It looks for radio signals. That's what the equipment does. A bug transmits. That's the whole point of a bug. That's what makes it findable. Walt's bomb is a simple closed electrical circuit. It doesn't transmit anything. It just sits there, inert, waiting for a bell to complete it. The sweep was looking for the wrong category of object because Gus had asked the wrong question. He was worried about being recorded. He wasn't worried about being killed by a man in a wheelchair who hasn't spoken in 3 years. So the sweep isn't a failure, it's a plan working. And the fact that it turns up on every list anyway tells you something about how those lists get made. What genuinely doesn't hold, and what nobody seems to complain about, is Gus's own logic in the same scene. Tyrus offers to do it. Right there. He says, "I'll take care of Hector," which is obviously correct. That is the correct operational decision, and Gus has made the correct operational decision every single time for 20 years, without exception, at enormous personal cost. And Gus says, "I do this." 20 years of discipline. 20 years of never being in the room, never touching anything, never leaving a fingerprint on any part of his own empire. And it comes apart because he wants to look Hector Salamanca in the eye while he does it. Because of Max, because of a swimming pool in Mexico a long time ago, and a man he loved bleeding into the tiles while Hector watched. Is that a hole, or is that the point? I think it's the point. I think it's obviously the point, and I think it's the best thing about the character. Gus's entire architecture exists because of that grief, and the architecture cannot survive the thing that built it. He was always going to be in that room. He built the whole empire specifically so he could eventually be in that room. The competence was never the goal. The competence was the delivery mechanism. Which means the most careful man in the show dies because of the one thing he was never careful about. And it's not a writing failure, it's the design. Now, the super lab. There's a methamphetamine laboratory underneath an industrial laundry in Albuquerque. It's excavated. It's a proper room with a ceiling and lights and industrial ventilation and enough electrical supply to run a small factory. There's a lift. There's a chemical shower. It's an enormous piece of civil engineering sitting under a working business in an American city. And nobody noticed it being built. Think about what that construction actually involves. You're removing thousands of cubic meters of earth. You're pouring concrete. You're running power at industrial capacity, which means either a suspicious relationship with the utility company or a generator arrangement that itself needs explaining. You're installing ventilation that has to go somewhere, and where it goes is the surface, and what comes out of it is not laundry steam. You need a crew, a real crew with skills over months. The show never addresses this, not once. It presents the lab as simply existing, the way it presents the chicken restaurant as simply existing. Because Gus is a magician, and the show doesn't want to explain the trick. And then, 6 years later, Better Call Saul spent an entire season on it. That's the bit that makes me laugh. Werner Ziegler and his German crew, the whole beautiful, sad, elaborate arc of a man who builds the lab and then can't cope with being locked away from his wife and wanders off to a spa and gets shot in a desert for it. That whole story exists in part to answer a question Breaking Bad never officially acknowledged it had left open. A prequel spending a season retroactively installing the plumbing under a show that had already ended, and doing it so well that the plumbing became one of the best things either show ever did. I don't think there's a better example anywhere of what a patch job can be when it's done with actual affection. While we're here, the tequila. Gus goes to Mexico. He walks into Don Eladio's compound, into the house of the man who executed Max in front of him, and he brings a bottle of very good tequila as tribute. And Eladio makes him drink first, obviously because Eladio isn't an idiot, and Gus drinks, and then everyone drinks, and then everyone dies around a swimming pool. Gus has poisoned the bottle and taken an antidote beforehand, and then gone straight to a bathroom to be sick into a sink, while a dozen cartel bosses die in the sunshine. I love that sequence, and I want to name one thing about it. The poison is in the bottle. Gus drinks from the bottle. The margin between Gus's plan and Gus dying at that pool is the speed at which he can get to a toilet and a doctor who happens to be standing by outside. And I'm not going to call that a crack either, but it's a man who has spent 20 years never taking a risk, taking the biggest one available at a swimming pool on purpose, because the swimming pool is where it has to happen. Same instinct as the wheelchair, same man. He'll take any risk at all if the setting is right. That's the tell, really. Everyone reads Gus as the disciplined one. He isn't. He's the patient one. There's an enormous difference, and the show is entirely clear about it if you're watching. One more Gus question before we move on. Why does he keep Walt alive at all? Because he shouldn't. From the first meeting, Walt is a liability. He's emotional, he's proud, he's attached to Jesse in ways that make him unpredictable, and he is very obviously going to cause a problem. Gus knows this within about a fortnight. He says so out loud in one of those quiet, menacing conversations he specializes in. And Gus trains a replacement. Gale is right there. Gale is competent, delighted to be involved, and would work for a fraction of the trouble. The plan is explicitly to have Gale learn the formula and then remove Walt. That's the plan. Multiple characters in the show say the plan, and then it doesn't happen. Because Walt has Gale killed, and Gus's response to having his replacement murdered by the man he was trying to replace is to slit Victor's throat in front of everyone and then keep employing Walt for another season. The show's answer is the product, 99.1%. Gus needs the purity because the purity is the brand, and the brand is the business, and Gale couldn't quite hit it. That's fine, that's coherent, and I'll take it. But my answer's a bit different. Gus is the only villain in the show whose villainy is also a competence fantasy. He's the one you watch and think, I wish I ran anything the way that man runs a chicken restaurant. And a competence fantasy needs someone competent to admire, or it's just a man alone being tidy. Walt is the only person in the world who understands what Gus has built. That's dangerous. And it's also the only relationship Gus has had since the swimming pool. Fun detail to finish on, that final shot where Gus walks out of the blast and adjusts his tie and the camera comes around. 19 takes. 19. To get a man to walk out of a door and fall over correctly anyway. 19 takes, and then everything he built goes to a man who cannot stop counting things, which is where the money comes in, and there's rather a lot of it. There's a shot in gliding over all of Skylar standing in a storage unit in front of a pile of cash, and it's one of my favorite images in the whole series, partly because of what it does to the show's argument and partly because of what Anna Gunn does with her face, which is nothing at all. She just looks at it. She's not impressed and she's not frightened. She's tired in a way that goes down about 4 floors. And she says the line, "How much is enough? How big does this pile have to be?" The production reportedly worked out the dimensions at roughly 6 feet by 3 feet by 8, which sounds like an absurd amount of money because it is. And Skylar tells him plainly that it's more than they could spend in 10 lifetimes, and that she stopped counting it, and that she has no idea how much is actually there because there's no mechanism by which a person could find out. That's the scene where Walt quits, not out of guilt, out of having nothing left to prove to a number. Now, the money is where Breaking Bad's arithmetic gets a bit soft, and the soft bit is a nice one because the show is partly aware of it. Start with the laundering because the show is honest about this to its own detriment. The A1A car wash cannot process this money. It just can't. A car wash is a cash business, yes, and that's why it's a decent front, but there's a ceiling. You can only claim so many customers. A single-site car wash in Albuquerque doing an implausible volume every single day, month after month, is not a plausible pipeline for the sums Walt is generating at his peak. Skylar says this. She says it directly, to his face. She's the accountant. She's the only person in the show who's actually looked at it. And then the show keeps going anyway. The money keeps arriving. Skylar keeps notionally laundering it. And the arithmetic never catches up, because if the arithmetic caught up, the show would have to become a show about a family that owns 12 laundrettes and a nail bar, and nobody wants that. That's a convenience rather than a whole. Everything is technically possible if you assume a great deal of off-screen structuring that the show declines to describe. But the reason it stands out is precisely that the show made Skylar say the true thing out loud. If nobody had mentioned it, nobody would have thought about it. By having the smartest financial mind in the series announce that the plan is impossible, and then proceeding with the plan, the show creates the gap itself. Then there's Ted Beneke of Beneke Fabricators, who Skylar was seeing before the show starts and who has an accounting problem of his own. Skylar forges his books to keep herself out of an audit, and then the audit happens anyway, and she goes into that room and performs a spectacular, deliberate, cringing bit of theater as a bimbo bookkeeper who doesn't understand what she's done. It's magnificent. Anna Gunn is doing about 4 things at once in that scene, and then Ted won't pay the IRS, so Skylar gives him the money, and Ted uses it on a Mercedes. And then Saul's people go around to persuade him, and he trips on a rug and hits his head on a counter and ends up in a neck brace, terrified, agreeing to everything. And then that's it. That's the end of Ted. He's mentioned once more and disappears. The IRS is investigating a company. Skylar is materially involved with that company. A large sum of untraceable cash arrives to settle a tax bill from an unexplained source. And the state's response is to shrug and close the file. In any real audit, that money is the beginning of a conversation, not the end of one. Where it came from is the entire question. That's what an audit is. But the show is done with Ted, so the state is done with Ted. And then there's the website, which is the one that makes me laugh. Walt Jr. sets up a donation page for his father's cancer treatment, SaveWalterWhite.com. It's a sweet thing for a teenager to do, and it goes nowhere because that's what happens to donation pages. So Saul has a man in Belarus route Walt's own money through it in small anonymous donations from fake accounts. And suddenly the site is bringing in enormous sums from strangers, and Walt Jr. is delighted. And Walt has to sit there and receive his son's gratitude for a gift he gave himself, which is a brutal scene and a lovely bit of laundering in theory. In practice, it's a website belonging to a minor, receiving international payments in a pattern generated by a man in Belarus attached to a family already inside a federal narcotics investigation, and nobody at any point runs a report on it. Hank's own department. Hank, who was sitting at that dinner table, having this website explained to him with enthusiasm by a 16-year-old. The donations are, in the show's own logic, the single most traceable thing Walt ever does. It's a paper trail with a bow on it, and it just sits there. Now, the barrels. At the end of Season 5's first half, Walt has more money than he can store, and eventually, after everything comes apart, he needs to move it. He rents a van, he puts everything into 7 plastic barrels. He drives out to Tohajili, to the patch of desert where he and Jesse cooked for the first time, and he buries them and he checks the coordinates on a GPS unit, and then he smashes the GPS, alone, in one go, in the dark. Walter White is 51 at this point. He has lung cancer. He has been through chemotherapy. He's not a large or robust man, and the show has spent 5 seasons reminding you that he coughs blood into toilets. He digs a hole large enough for 7 barrels of currency. He lowers them in. He fills it back in. He does this by himself with a shovel in the desert, and then he drives back and he's a bit dusty, and Hewell notices the dirt on him. But that does not lead Hank to the site. I have thought about this more than is reasonable. I've thought about how deep that hole has to be, and how much a barrel packed solid with banknotes actually weighs, and whether one man could physically lift it off the back of a van, and I've concluded that the honest answer is probably not, and that I don't care, because the image of him out there alone with a shovel is worth more than the physics. And this is where the 80 million comes in. In Ozymandias, when Jack's crew are digging the barrels up, Walt tells him what's down there. $80 million. It's a plea. He's bargaining for Hank's life with a number. The thing is, Gilligan himself has expressed doubt about whether that figure holds up against the physical volume of 7 barrels. The creator of the show publicly side-eyeing his own prop, working out that the number he'd put in his own character's mouth might not fit inside the containers his own art department had built. I find that very funny and also quite human. It's the kind of thing that only becomes visible after the fact when someone with a calculator and too much time works out the cubic capacity of a 55-gallon drum against the thickness of a banknote and posts it. And the man who made the show reads it and goes, "Ah." And here's the bigger version of all of this, which nobody in the show ever raises. A high school chemistry teacher on a state salary whose family was in genuine financial difficulty 18 months ago suddenly owns a car wash outright. Cash purchase. His son has a website that has received an extraordinary volume of anonymous donations that arrived conveniently in amounts and patterns that a bored analyst could pick apart in an afternoon. His wife's bookkeeping client has just had a mysterious tax windfall. His brother-in-law's enormous medical bills have been paid by an unexplained gambling story. Nobody looks. In any real investigation, the money is the thing you look at, because the money is the only part of a drug operation that has to touch the legitimate world. That's how these cases are actually made, not through chases, through paperwork. Breaking Bad is a show about a man who is caught by a book of poetry rather than a bank statement. And I understand why, dramatically. Bank statements don't act, but it does mean there's a whole apparatus of ordinary financial scrutiny that simply doesn't exist in Albuquerque. Sort of like how people talk about lottery winners. Everyone imagines the winning. Nobody imagines the 6 months afterwards of forms and advisors and awkward phone calls from relatives, because that's the boring part. And the boring part is where the actual difficulty lives. There's one more money thing, and it's a small one, but it's my favorite. The show never lets Walt enjoy any of it. Not once. There's no scene of him buying something lovely. He gets the Aztec, which he loves, and then he blows it up. He gets a Dodge Challenger and Skylar makes him return it. The one time he does something purely for pleasure, buying his son a sports car, he has to take it back and destroy it in a car park, doing donuts, screaming, alone. The man generates more money than a person can physically store and spends it on absolutely nothing. It just accumulates in a storage unit and then sits untouched, buried in a hole. That's not a plot hole. That's the closing argument delivered in the middle of the show, and hardly anyone notices it at the time. Which brings me eventually round to the blue. Blue meth does exist, but it's just ordinary meth tinted blue and no purer than any other kind. I'll just say it plainly because it's the largest factual liberty in the entire show, and it's also the single best decision anyone involved ever made. Methamphetamine of high purity is clear or white. That's the whole point of purity. The color comes from what's wrong with it, from the contaminants and the leftovers and the bad chemistry. So the purer you get, the less color there is. A product at the level the show describes would be translucent, glassy. There's no impurity in that synthesis that produces a blue tint, and if there were, its presence would by definition be reducing the purity, which is the exact opposite of what the show wants the blue to mean. So the blue is a lie. It's a pure visual invention, put there because the show needed a brand and a color you could see from across a room and a way to signal in a single silent shot that Heisenberg's product has arrived in a new city. And it's perfect. No notes. It gives you the cold open of the mariachi song. It gives you Hank holding a bag up to the light. It gives you the entire mechanism by which Walt's ego becomes traceable, because Walt cannot bear to make an anonymous product. He has to sign it. The blue is a signature, and the signature is the flaw, and the flaw is the character. You could have an accurate version of this show where the meth is white and nobody could tell whose was whose, and that show is unwatchable. I'd take the lie every single time. Since we're on the subject of purity, 99.1. That's the figure. That's Walt's number, and it's said with such reverence by everyone in the drug economy that it becomes a kind of scripture. Gail can get to 96, Todd gets to 76, and Lydia looks at him like he's brought her a dead bird. Now, 99.1 is not an impossible number in a laboratory. In a laboratory, it's a reasonable ambition. In a super lab with environmental controls and proper equipment and a chemical shower, sure, fine, you could believe it. But the early cooks are in a caravan, in the desert, in autumn, with no temperature control, no humidity control, no consistent power, sand blowing through the door, and two men shouting at each other. And the show wants you to believe the product coming out of that caravan is stable, repeatable, laboratory grade, batch after batch, week after week. That's not how any of this works. Reproducibility is the hard part of chemistry, not the interesting part. Anyone can hit a good number once. Hitting it every time is what a facility is for. The variables in a hot metal box in a desert are enormous and uncontrollable. And the honest expectation would be a product that swings wildly depending on how hot it was that Tuesday. The show knows, I think, because the second Gus builds the lab, everyone talks about the lab as though it's the answer to a problem that had been bothering them. And it is, it's just that the problem had been silently solved for 2 seasons in a caravan for no reason. The cook itself deserves a mention, and this one the show handles well. Phosphine gas. Season 1. Walt kills Emilio and incapacitates Crazy 8 by making phosphine in an enclosed space and stepping outside with the mask. And it's the first time you see the mind do something ugly. That's real chemistry, roughly, and the production was famously careful to fudge the details in ways that keep it fictional while keeping it credible. The consultants they used knew their stuff, and the show's habit was to get it right and then break it slightly on purpose. But 2 men in a sealed metal box with an open cook, no proper extraction, and no consistent air handling should be in significantly more trouble than they ever are. The gas mask business exists precisely because the show knows this, and then across 5 seasons, the actual physiological cost of standing in that atmosphere for hours simply never arrives. Fine. Onward. Now the methylamine, because the show's entire supply chain rests on it. Walt's synthesis route needs methylamine, and methylamine is watched because everyone knows what it's for. That's why there's a train. That's why there's a barrel-stealing scene with a fake ID and a lot of nonsense at a chemical warehouse. That's why Lydia exists at all, because she's the woman at Madrigal who can make the paperwork say something untrue. Fine, good. That's a well-built constraint, and the show gets a lot of story out of it. But then there's the alternative, which is on the table the entire time and which everybody keeps refusing. Pseudoephedrine, the ordinary route. The one every actual cook uses. It's harder to source in volume, sure, that's the whole smurfing business, but it's not impossible. And Mike suggests scaling back to it directly when the methylamine gets difficult. And Walt says no. Because pseudoephedrine gives you an ordinary product. It gives you white. It gives you something anonymous, and Walt would honestly rather rob a train and risk everything than make a product that doesn't have his name on it. So the entire second half of the series happens because a man refused to make a slightly worse drug. That's not a plot hole, that's a diagnosis. The Magnet. Season 5 opens with a flash forward to Walt's 52nd birthday and his purchase of a machine gun. There's a laptop in a DEA evidence room with footage from the super lab on it, and Walt cannot get to it, and so obviously the answer is to build an electromagnet the size of a shed, mount it on the back of a lorry, park it against the exterior wall of a police building, and wipe the drive through the masonry. Jesse's line is one of the best in the show. Jesse says, "Yeah, bitch. Magnets." And it works, sort of. It works so well that the magnet tips the entire lorry over, which is a lovely piece of business because it's the show doing its favorite trick, which is having a plan succeed and fail in the same second. Now, the objections stack up quickly here. A field strong enough to wipe magnetic media through a wall at that distance is a field that is doing extraordinary things to everything else in the building. Every drive, every phone, every filing cabinet full of paper clips. It's a field that would be pulling the room apart. Instead, it conveniently destroys the one item they need destroyed, and then inconveniently topples a picture frame, which cracks, which reveals a Cayman Islands account number written on the back, which is how the whole thread pulls. That's a convenience with a lovely bit of irony attached. It also, I'd argue, isn't really trying to be plausible. It's trying to be an image. Walt and Jesse and Mike sat in a lorry in the dark while an enormous machine screams at a police station is a thing you remember, and the physics is downstream of that. Now, the train. Dead Freight is one of the best hours of television anyone has made, and I won't have a word said against it. The heist itself is elegant. They can't just rob the train because that means killing the crew and leaving evidence. So Jesse works it out. What if you rob it and nobody knows it was robbed? You siphon the methylamine out and you replace the volume with water, kilo for kilo, so the weight at the far end matches the manifest. And the train arrives and the paperwork is fine and nobody ever looks. That's clever. That's properly clever. And it's Jesse who thinks of it, which matters, because the show is quietly building the case that Jesse is not stupid and that everyone, including Walt, has been underrating him for 4 years. The logistics are ambitious. 1,000 gallons out and 1,000 gallons in on a schedule, in a window created by a fake broken down truck across a level crossing, while a man in a hole under the tracks does the plumbing. And the bit I love is that the characters go over every failure mode in advance. They sit and they war game it. What if someone calls it in? What if the crew sees something? What if the timing slips? They think of everything. And then a good Samaritan stops to help push the broken truck, which nobody predicted. And a child on a dirt bike comes over a hill, which nobody could have predicted, which is the writers showing their work quite deliberately. They made the characters exhaustive so that the thing that broke it would be the thing you cannot plan for, which is other people existing. Todd shoots the boy. Everything downstream of that moment, all of it, the whole collapse of the second half of the show, comes out of a kid who liked tarantulas. There's one more chemistry thing I want to name, and it's on the good side of the ledger. Crazy 8 in the plate. Walt has a man chained to a pole in a basement with a bike lock, and he cannot make himself do it. He spends an entire episode not doing it. He makes the man a sandwich. He cuts the crusts off. He talks to him about his family's furniture shop. He writes a list of pros and cons, and the cons column against killing him is long, but in the pro column he writes that he'll kill your entire family if you let him go. And then he goes upstairs and looks at the broken plate on the floor and counts the pieces, and one is missing. That's it. That's the whole thing, a shard of crockery. Walt has to check, and he checks, and the piece is gone, and he knows, and then he has to go down those stairs and do it. There is no hole in that episode. There is nothing to pick at. It's a chemistry teacher counting fragments of a plate, and it's airtight, and it's the reason people believe the show is airtight everywhere else. Since we're on the subject of things that are airtight and things that aren't, there's a plant I've been avoiding. There's a shot at the end of season 4 of a gun spinning on a glass patio table. Walt is sitting by his pool. He's out of options. Everything is closing in. And he spins the revolver the way you'd spin a bottle, and it slows down and it stops, and the barrel is pointing at a potted plant. That's the whole reveal. That's how the show tells you. It doesn't have anybody say it. It just points a gun at a lily of the valley and lets you work it out about 4 minutes later, and by then, it's the last shot of the season, and you're sitting there feeling ill. Let me lay out what actually happened, because it's fiddly and half of it is not on screen. Brock Cantillo is 6 years old. He's Andrea's son. Jesse loves him. Brock ends up in hospital, critically ill, and Jesse discovers that the ricin cigarette he's been carrying around is missing from his packet. And he immediately, correctly, works out that Walt has poisoned the boy to turn Jesse against Gus. And then Walt talks him out of it. In a kitchen, at gunpoint, in one of the most repellent scenes in the series, Walt convinces Jesse that it was Gus. That Gus took the cigarette because Gus has cameras on everything, and Gus poisoned the child to break Jesse's loyalty and turn him against Walt. He asks Jesse, "Why would I poison a child?" And Jesse believes him because Jesse wants to, because Walt is the closest thing to a father he has left. Then the doctors say it wasn't ricin at all. It was lily of the valley, digitalis glycosides, which are in every part of the plant, and which children occasionally eat because the berries look like sweets and taste like it. The doctors assume he found it in a garden, nasty, dangerous, and usually survivable if you get to a hospital. That's the trick. Walt used a poison that was plausibly an accident so that when Brock survived, the whole thing would look like a coincidence, and Jesse would have no reason to keep pulling the thread. And I'll give the man this. He didn't use the ricin he could have. Ricin would have been simpler and more certain, and Brock would have died. He picked the thing that probably wouldn't kill a child. That's the closest thing to a moral act in the entire sequence, and it's still monstrous, and I think the show knows exactly how thin that distinction is. Now the problem, almost none of the mechanism is shown. The writer's room reportedly had a nickname for this. The evil juice box man. That's how they talked about it internally. The idea being that Walt extracts the toxin, injects it into a juice box, and gets that juice box into Brock's packed lunch at school. Off screen, all of it. And I want you to sit with the practical shape of that for a moment, because this is the largest unshown link in the entire series. Walt has met Brock precisely once, briefly, at Andrea's flat. He has no established relationship with the boy, no access to the boy's school, no knowledge of the boy's routine, and no plausible way to be in the vicinity of a primary school lunch bag without a teacher in Albuquerque noticing that a middle-aged man is standing near the coat pegs. He is, at this point in the story, a man whose face is known to precisely the wrong people. And he has to get the poison into the specific container that the specific child will drink from. And only that child, because if Andrea has a sip of it or another kid nicks it, the whole thing becomes a completely different story. The show never says, not one frame. It happens in the gap between two scenes, and you're expected to accept that it happened because the plant is on the patio. That's not an unexplained in the sense I set up earlier, because there isn't an obvious available answer sitting just off camera. There's a genuine question about mechanism that no amount of squinting resolves. It's the closest the show ever comes to asking you to take something on faith. And then there's Huel. Huel Babineau is a very large man who works for Saul as a bodyguard. He's a wonderful character, and Lavelle Crawford plays him with this quality of amused immovability, like a wardrobe that's decided to be your friend. Huel is also apparently one of the great pickpockets of the modern era. So what he has to do is this. Jesse comes to Saul's office. Huel pats him down at the door, which is a thing that happens in front of everyone and involves a lot of contact. During that pat down, Huel has to lift the packet of cigarettes out of Jesse's pocket. Then he has to quietly swap Jesse's entire pack, the one containing the ricin capsule, for an identical pack without it, without crushing anything. Then he has to return a substitute packet with the correct number of cigarettes missing to Jesse's pocket. 3 sleights of hand in sequence under Jesse's nose by an enormous man who is not built for subtlety and who has just been touching him all over. And the show, delightfully, knows this is a stretch, because a season later, when Saul hands the ricin cigarette back to Walt, Saul remarks that he's amazed Huel didn't break it. That's the show winking. That's the writer's room going, yes, we know, we're not going to explain it, but we want you to see that we saw it. I love it, and I also think it's a bit cheeky. Acknowledging an implausibility is not the same as resolving one. It's just a nicer way of not resolving it. The bit I find most interesting, though, and it took me about 3 rewatches to notice, is this. The cigarette was never necessary. Think about it. The purpose of the missing cigarette is to make Jesse believe that Gus took it and used the ricin on Brock. But Brock wasn't poisoned with ricin. Brock was poisoned with a plant. The doctors were always going to find that out. So the cigarette does exactly one job, which is to be missing at the right moment, so that Jesse jumps to the ricin conclusion and comes storming around to Walt's house so that Walt can perform his big scene and redirect him at Gus. Walt could have made that argument without the cigarette. Gus poisoned the boy to turn you against me is an argument that works. Whether or not anything is missing from Jesse's pocket. If anything, it works better because it doesn't require a physical object to have moved. And the cigarette plan has no guarantee attached. Jesse has to notice it's gone. He has to notice at the right time. He has to draw the specific conclusion Walt wants rather than any of the 4 other available conclusions. It's an elaborate bit of machinery bolted onto a plan that didn't need it, and the whole thing balances on whether a man decides to have a smoke at a convenient moment. That's very Walt, actually, now that I say it out loud. Walt cannot do the simple version of anything. If there's a plan with 1 moving part and a plan with 6, he'll take the 6 every time, because 6 feels like intelligence and 1 feels like luck. And he'd rather be clever than safe. And I should say something about Jane here because the Brock business is the second time Walt does this and the first one is worse. Walt stands in a bedroom and watches Jane Margolis choke to death on her own vomit and does nothing. He reaches out, he nearly turns her, and then he stops and he watches and he lets it happen and he cries about it, which is the part that gets me. He's upset, he's also not moving. And then Jane's father, an air traffic controller, goes back to work too soon, distracted, wrecked, and 2 aircraft collide over Albuquerque. Now people call that contrived. The odds of the specific man whose daughter you killed being the specific man who directs aircraft over your specific city. And on paper, yes, that's an enormous coincidence. But the show set it up 1 episode earlier, in a bar, with a bloke in a shirt telling Walt about his job. It's planted, it's not a coincidence, it's a delayed detonation, and it's the same trick as the poetry book, just faster and crueler. What it also does, structurally, is give you the template for Brock. Walt lets a child's mother figure die to keep Jesse. Walt poisons a child to keep Jesse. Both times the justification is Jesse. Both times the actual reason is that Walt cannot tolerate not being the most important person in Jesse Pinkman's life. He'll do anything to that boy except lose him. And then there's the ricin itself, which has the most extraordinary career of any prop in television history. Follow it. Walt makes it in season 2 to kill Tuco. He makes ricin to sprinkle into Tuco's food. Hector Salamanca sees him do it and rings his bell. Tuco misreads the warning and keeps pushing the poison plate at his uncle, and Hector knocks it away before Walt ever gets to use it. That's the first attempt. Failed because of a bell. Then Jesse wants it for the dealers who killed Combo, and Walt refuses. Then Walt makes it again for Gus and gives it to Jesse in a vial that Jesse hides in a cigarette, and it's never used because Huel lifts it. Then Walt gets it back from Saul and plants a fake capsule made of salt in Jesse's Roomba so that Jesse can find it and stop worrying. And Walt takes the real one home and hides it behind an electrical socket in his bedroom, and it sits in that wall for months, through everything, through Hank, through Ozymandias, through the whole collapse. And then Walt comes back to an abandoned, condemned house with Heisenberg spray painted across the living room wall and prizes it out from behind the socket with a screwdriver. And it kills exactly one person, Lydia Rodart Quayle, in a coffee shop, in her tea. Across 4 of Breaking Bad's 5 seasons, 2 failed attempts, 1 fake, 1 hiding place, and 1 victim who wasn't the target any of the times it was made. I love that vial, and I'm not entirely sure I can defend it. The odds of that specific object surviving that specific journey and arriving at that specific table are absurd. But it's also the show's most patient piece of setup, and when Walt says on the phone that he put it in the stevia, I still get a bit of a chill. That's the unexplained versus whole business again in one object. Every individual step is possible. The sequence is ridiculous, which is a reasonable place to stop and go out to the desert. 34, 59, 20, 106, 36, 52, that's it. That's the coordinates Walt reads out over a phone while crouched behind a rock in the desert, calling in an army of neo-Nazis to kill a man he loves. And the moment the last number leaves his mouth, he sees the car properly and realizes it's Hank. That's the famous one. That's the scene that's been argued about since 2013. And the reason I've heard more amateur mobile phone triangulation theories than any person should encounter in one lifetime. Let me set it up properly because the episode is a masterpiece and the setup is gorgeous. Jesse has finally turned. He's decided to hit Walt where he actually lives, which isn't his family, it's the money. But Jesse doesn't know where the money is. So they go after Huel, who does. They pick Huel up and take him to a DEA safe house and they lie to him. Hank shows him a photograph of Jesse with his brains across the pavement, which is faked, and Huel folds instantly. He gives them everything, 7 barrels, a rental van, and crucially, Walt came back from wherever he went covered in dirt carrying a shovel. Hank's reaction to 7 barrels is one of my favorite readings in the whole show. He just says it back, 7 barrels. The number lands on him like a piano, so they trace the van to the rental place. And there's no GPS in it because there was a lawsuit and the ACLU won, which is a very funny detail to hang an entire plot on. So they know there's a hole in the desert somewhere, and the desert is hundreds of square miles. Their solution is the fake photograph. They take a picture of a barrel in a hole with money in it. They send it to Walt, and Jesse rings him and tells him he's found it and he's going to burn it all. And Walt panics and drives. And that works. That's the trap. Walt leads them to it himself because he cannot bear to lose the money, and Hank later gloats about it and points out that Walt was so greedy he didn't notice the dirt in the photograph didn't even match the dirt out there. Beautiful. Airtight so far. Here's the question. When Walt arrives at Tohajili, he's alone. He gets out, he panics. He realizes the line has gone dead and he's been played. And then a car appears in the distance. Hank's car is already there, or arrives immediately behind him, in hundreds of square miles. So how did they follow him? And I want to be fair to the objection because it's not silly. The plan as constructed doesn't obviously include a mechanism for tailing him. If they'd been following him closely enough to arrive at the same second, Walt would have seen them in a landscape with no cover for miles. And if they were triangulating his phone, that's a lot of accuracy from a call in 2010 in the middle of nowhere. And the show doesn't say so. The theories, in fairness to all of them, phone triangulation based on Jesse's insistence that Walt not hang up. That's the popular one, and it leans on the DEA having the capacity to locate a phone in real time, which they broadly do, though not usually to the precision of a specific patch of scrub. The odometer theory. Hank had access to Walt's car and could have worked out the distance traveled on the burial trip, which narrows a radius but doesn't give you a point. The simplest theory, which is that they just followed him at distance with more than one vehicle, the way police actually follow people, and the show simply didn't show you the tail. And that's the answer, more or less. Gilligan went on The Ringer's Plot Hole podcast in late 2025 and addressed it directly. His position, and I'm representing what he said rather than what I'd like him to have said, is that it isn't a hole. They followed him. That's it. That's the whole thing. The mechanics are ordinary, and the show didn't consider them worth screen time because they weren't dramatic, and the argument that's raged for over a decade is essentially an argument about a missing establishing shot. And that's what gets me about this one. The most debated plot hole in the most scrutinized show of the century comes down to about 4 seconds of unshot footage. One wide shot of a car half a mile back, that's all it would have taken. One shot, maybe 2 seconds of screen time, and 12 years of internet argument simply doesn't happen. There's something quite lovely in that, I think. The gap isn't a failure of logic, it's a failure of reassurance. The show didn't think it needed to reassure you because the show was busy doing something much more interesting, and the something more interesting was so good that everyone went back and picked at the only loose bit. There's a smaller one buried in the same episode that nobody ever raises, and I think it's better. Hank and Gomez interrogate Huel in a DEA safe house. Except it isn't a safe house, it's a motel room because Hank is running this entire investigation off the books. He's been suspended from it in all but name. He can't tell his colleagues because telling his colleagues means telling them that Heisenberg is his brother-in-law and that he's been eating dinner with him for 2 years while missing it, which would end his career on the spot. So the case against the biggest methamphetamine producer in the Southwest is being run by 2 men and a former junkie out of a motel with faked photographs and a witness who has not been read anything at all. Everything Hank does from Blood Money onwards is inadmissible, all of it. The Huel confession, obtained by deception in an unofficial location without counsel. The recording of Walt's phone call to Jack. The entire chain. The show knows this. That's why Hank is so desperate to make an arrest with witnesses and a confession on tape, because he understands that he's built a case out of things that will not survive a courtroom, and he's hoping that the sheer weight of it will carry. And then it doesn't matter because everyone dies in a desert. But you can picture the alternate ending easily enough. Walt is arrested at Tohajili and walks out of a courthouse 18 months later because a DEA agent ran a rogue investigation against a relative and contaminated everything he touched. And Hank would have known that. Hank knew that the whole time. That's just Hank. And it's very sad. Which brings me to the ending of that episode, which is not a hole, but is definitely a choice. Everything resolves. Walt calls Jack off. He surrenders. He walks out with his hands up, and Hank handcuffs him and reads him his rights, and it's over. And Hank rings Marie, and there's this extraordinary moment where the show lets you have it. Hank won. He rings his wife and tells her, and you can hear her exhale. And then Jack's convoy arrives anyway because Walt's call to cancel didn't stick. Because Jack was never coming for Jesse, Jack was coming for the business. Guns come up, everybody's shouting, Walt is locked in the back of a car screaming at everyone to stop. And the show cuts to black. Mid-gunfight. 3 principals in immediate mortal danger and a hard cut to a title card and a week of waiting. Breaking Bad had never done that before. Not like that. It had done cliffhangers, obviously, but it had never left multiple characters mid-firefight and walked away, and there's a fair argument that it's the single cruelest thing the show ever did to its audience. I don't think it's a flaw, but it is the one moment where I can feel the machinery, where the show is aware it has an audience and is doing something to them on purpose. Everything else in that episode is about the characters. That last second is about you. And what's on the other side of it, of course, is Ozymandias, which is the best episode of television I've ever seen and which I'm not going to attempt to cover tonight. It deserves its own evening. Genuinely, there's a whole thing to be said about that hour, about the flashback to the first cook, about Skylar and the knife, about that phone call, and I'd rather do it properly than squeeze it in here at midnight. But I'll say this much because it's relevant to the plot hole business. Ozymandias contains almost nothing to pick at. Not because it's careful, but because it's the only episode where nobody has a plan. Everything that happens in that hour is consequence. Nobody's scheming, nobody's constructing an elaborate mechanism with 6 moving parts. It's just people in the desert having the worst day of their lives, and then people in a house having a worse one. You can't find plot holes in it because there's no plot left. The plot has run out, and all that's underneath is people. Which might be the most interesting thing I've noticed doing this, actually. The holes cluster around the clever bits, the magnets and the pickpockets and the wheelchairs. The show is bulletproof exactly where it stops being clever. New Hampshire, then. The cabin is the best thing in the last stretch of the show, and nobody talks about it enough. Walt is taken to New Hampshire by Ed Galbraith, the disappearer, who runs a vacuum cleaner shop and moves people for $125,000, cash, no exceptions. And Walt ends up in a wooden box in a snowfield with no phone, no internet, no neighbors, and 2 boxes of a chemotherapy drug and a stack of DVDs. And Ed comes once a month with supplies, and Walt pays him $10,000 an hour for company. That's the deal. $10,000 for 1 hour of a man sitting in a room playing cards with him because Walt has $11 million in a barrel under the floorboards and nothing whatsoever to spend it on except not being alone. That's the whole show in one image. That's the argument, finished. A man who did all of it for his family, paying by the hour for someone to be in the room. So, from there, Walt is the most wanted man in the United States. There's a manhunt. It runs 6 months. His face is on the news constantly. Gretchen and Elliot go on Charlie Rose to say he had nothing to do with gray matter, and Walt watches it in a bar and turns back into Heisenberg in about 4 seconds of Bryan Cranston's face doing almost nothing. And he then drives from New Hampshire to Albuquerque in a stolen car, alone, with a bullet hole in the windscreen. I want to be gentle about this section because I love this episode and gentleness is the correct register for it. But Felina is a series of implausibilities in a coat. The bullet hole is because he steals a car outside a bar and the owner has presumably reported it stolen, and there are police in America, and he drives across roughly 2,000 miles of that country in a vehicle that is on a list and nobody stops him. Then he sits in the cold and a police car pulls up beside him and it's over, and he closes his eyes and he says a prayer, and the keys fall out of the sun visor into his lap. Gilligan has been asked about that a lot, and his answer is more or less that it's meant to be luck, or providence if you'd rather, and that the show has always run on Walt's absurd luck, and that if you don't like it, you can read it as coincidence. I've made my peace with it. Partly because the alternative reading is quite good, which is that the universe is not helping Walt. The universe is delivering him. And everything after that point is not a victory lap. It's a sentence being carried out. He asks for one more chance and he gets it, and it kills him. But it's a bit convenient. It's a lot convenient. Then the Schwartzes. Walt gets Gretchen and Elliot's home address by ringing up and pretending to be a reporter from the New York Times. That works. A woman on the phone gives out a billionaire's home address to a stranger claiming to be press. Then he walks into a gated property in an affluent neighborhood through the front door, past whatever security a couple worth several $1 billion might reasonably have, and is standing in their living room looking at photographs of their life when they get home. And then the laser pointers. Badger and Skinny Pete, in a car, up the hill with 2 red dots, terrifying 2 of the wealthiest people in New Mexico into agreeing to launder $9 and a bit million into a trust for a teenager. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. The reveal is one of the funniest things the show ever did, and Skinny Pete's line afterwards, that the whole thing felt kind of shady, morality-wise, is the show reviewing itself in real time and being entirely correct. But here's the actual hole in that sequence, and it's a real one. And it's load-bearing. Badger and Skinny Pete tell Walt that the blue meth is still out there. That's how Walt knows Jesse's alive. That's the deduction. His product is still on the street at a purity nobody else can hit. Therefore, someone is cooking his formula. Therefore, Jesse is alive and cooking it. Except the blue meth being produced at Jack's compound goes to the Czech Republic. All of it. That's the entire arrangement. That's Lydia's whole business. It's why she's in the show. It's why she wears the blue suit and drinks the chamomile. Todd's product is going overseas via Madrigal's distribution. Badger and Skinny Pete are two low-level dealers in Albuquerque who have not been anywhere near Jack's operation but are closely connected to Jesse and Walt, who have. There's no route by which they know what's happening in a Czech supply chain, and there's no route by which they've encountered the product. Because the product isn't there, you could argue rumor, you could argue the drug economy is chatty and something leaked. But it's thin and it's carrying an enormous amount of weight, because the entire final act of the series turns on Walt working out that Jesse is alive. That's a proper hole in the last hour of the show. And I only noticed it on about the fourth watch because Badger and Skinny Pete are so delightful in that scene that you'd forgive them anything. And a word about the cage, since it's the reason any of the finale happens. Jesse spends the last stretch of the show in a hole under a shed on a chain, cooking. And the thing that keeps him there isn't the chain, it's Andrea and Brock. Todd explains this with enormous politeness, which is what makes Todd the most frightening thing in the series. He's not cruel, he's helpful. He murders people the way other people do the washing up. Jesse cooks at 96% under those conditions, held in a cage and forced into the lab to cook. Malnourished, beaten, sleeping in a pit with no reason to try. Which is either a hole or the saddest thing in the show, because the only thing Jesse Pinkman has left at that point is the one skill Walt gave him. And he can't stop being good at it, even when being good at it is the thing keeping him in the hole. He's better than Todd, that's why he's alive. His competence is his sentence. Then the stevia. Walt sits down opposite Lydia and Todd in a coffee shop in public as the most wanted man in America wearing a hat. And he knows exactly where Lydia will sit. Same seat, same table, same time, every week, same order, chamomile tea with soy milk, same sweetener caddy on the table. Walt has watched her do it, and Lydia is a woman whose anxiety expresses itself as ritual, and the ritual is the thing that kills her. That's actually beautiful. That's very good writing. And the payoff on the phone at the end when she's on the sofa with a temperature and he tells her what he's done is chilling. But he has to have arrived before her in a public place and placed the packet in the caddy in the right position such that she takes that one. And she has to take that one. There are other packets. There's a whole caddy of them. Anyway, the trunk, the M60. Walt buys a machine gun in a car park in the cold open of the season, and then does nothing with it for 8 episodes, and then he builds a turret out of a garage door opener, an office chair shaft, and a car boot. He assembles it in the desert while a robot in his head goes around in circles. And it's the show delivering at last on Jesse's suggestion from season 2 that what they need is a robot. And then he drives to Jack's compound and Jack's men frisk him thoroughly. They pat him down properly, they take his keys, they check him for a wire, they walk him inside, and they do not open the boot. These are paranoid, violent, professional criminals who have just been told that the man they murdered a DEA agent for has turned up unannounced. They search his body, they ignore the large sealed metal container at the back of his vehicle, and they park him precisely where he needs to be parked, down to a meter or two. Because the geometry has to work for the gun to sweep the room, so the geometry works, and then everything falls out perfectly. The gun kills everyone in the correct order, leaving Jack alive so Walt can shoot him, and Todd alive so Jesse can strangle him. And Walt takes exactly 1 ricochet in exactly the right place to give him the 20 minutes he needs. Kotaku ran a piece the day after it aired, calling the finale ridiculous, implausible, and pretty great. And honestly, I've never found a better summary. That's where I land too. Because this is a show that spent 5 seasons on a single rule, which is that Walt's plans go wrong. Every single one. The Mercury fulminate never actually comes close to killing him. The magnet tips a lorry. The train heist kills a child. The car bomb doesn't go off. Almost nothing Walter White has ever built has worked the way he drew it. And then the last one works perfectly, completely, every piece. which is either a failure of nerve or the kindest thing Gilligan ever did, and I go back and forth on it, depending on my mood. Some nights, I think the honest ending is the one where it all falls apart again, and he dies in a car park having achieved nothing. Some nights, I think we'd all earn the machine gun. There's one detail in that episode I want to end on, though, because it's the exact opposite of everything I've been talking about. Walt takes off his watch and leaves it on top of a payphone. There's no reason for it in the scene. It's a small, strange beat. He just takes it off and puts it down and walks away. The reason is that in the flash forward at the start of the season, filmed a year and a half earlier, Walt wasn't wearing the watch. Somebody noticed. And rather than hoping nobody else would, Gilligan wrote a moment where the character removes it and made it mean something, because the watch was a birthday present from Jesse in Better Days. That's a continuity pat, performed in story with a straight face and turned into a character beat. It's the same instinct as everything else I've talked about tonight, just running the other way. The same people who couldn't be bothered to show you a car following another car across a desert also stopped an entire finale to explain a wristwatch. I don't know what that says about anything, I just find it lovely. Right, this bit has no structure. I'm just going to go through the small ones in whatever order they arrive, because that's how they arrive when you're lying there thinking about it. Walt's hair, he shaves his head, which is a lovely bit of business because he does it himself in a bathroom while his son watches. And it's the moment he stops being a man having cancer and starts being a man having a decision. Good scene. But the chemotherapy is doing some fairly selective work. He's shirtless on several occasions across the run, and the chest hair is more or less intact. The mustache has a somewhat improvisational relationship with the treatment schedule. And I know this is a nothing complaint, and I know that half of it is the practical reality of an actor's face over 6 years of filming. But once you see it, you can't stop, and now neither can you. Sorry about that. The spare keys. In the finale, Walt goes back to the house. He asks his neighbor Becky whether she still has the spare key. She's still carrying her groceries, and she steps outside, and there's the whole business with her seeing him and dropping her shopping. Skylar changed the locks. Explicitly, it was a whole thing. And Walt says still, which means he's talking about the ones from before. There's a version where Skylar gave Carol a new set, which is a perfectly normal neighborly thing to do, and that closes it. Fine. But nobody says so, and it's another one of those where a single word in the dialogue creates a decade of pedantry. Osama bin Laden. This is my favorite factual wobble in the whole show, and it makes me laugh every time. Jack Welker, discussing the logistics of killing 10 men in 3 prisons in under 2 minutes, says that whacking bin Laden wasn't this complicated. That episode is set in 2009. Bin Laden was killed in May of 2011. It was written and filmed in 2012, when the raid was fresh in everyone's mind, and somebody put a topical line in the mouth of a character standing 2 years in his own past. That's just a mistake. That's a room full of people writing in 1 year about another year, and one of them forgetting which was which. And it's in the middle of a properly disturbing scene, this cheerful Nazi doing a bit of comedy timing about a thing that hasn't happened yet. While we're on that episode, 10 men, 3 prisons, under 2 minutes. Coordinated by an outside party with guards on the payroll and inmates willing to be seen doing it. Walt is told it can't be done that way, and his response is to say that it can and to instruct a neo-Nazi to figure it out, which is the exact management style of every terrible executive you've ever worked for, and one of the coldest moments in the series. And it does get done, simultaneously, across 3 separate institutions with 3 separate lockdown schedules and 3 separate sets of staff. Shanked, strangled, beaten, and 1 man burned alive in a holding cell, all inside the window, while Walt paces his living room looking at his watch. I've never seen anyone list that as a plot hole, and I think it's more implausible than half the things that do get listed. It's just that the sequence is so well cut, with the Nat King Cole over it, that nobody's brain has room to object. Small ones now, rapid fire. There's a poster in Los Pollos Hermanos in an episode set in 2009 congratulating them on the best burrito of 2010 because they filmed it in 2010 and someone made a prop. There are license plates all over the show with expiration dates from every year of production, 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, on cars that are supposed to be sitting in 2008. There's a TH in one of the credit sequences in the episode where Walt and Jesse meet Tuco at the junkyard. The show does that lovely thing of highlighting chemical element symbols inside the actors' names. CH is not an element. It has never been an element. Somebody got carried away. Holly's age. In Ozymandias, an officer reading out an Amber Alert describes her as 18 months old, which doesn't work. She's conceived somewhere around the start of the show, and Skylar's still pregnant at Walt's 50th. And the arithmetic from there simply doesn't reach 18 months by the time of that scene. Skylar and Walt's ages. In the pilot, Walt turns 50, and Skylar says she's not looking forward to 40, which puts about 11 or 12 years between them. Do the maths on when Walt Jr. was born, and Skylar was somewhere around 24. Not impossible, just a thing that the show never once acknowledges and which becomes strange the moment you notice it. The pizza. The pizza is not a plot hole. Walt takes a family-sized pizza out of a box and throws it onto the garage roof in a fit of rage after Skylar won't let him in, and it lands flat and stays there. People said it was impossible. Gilligan has pointed out correctly, and I think with some weariness, that it's not impossible, that they did it, and that it went up there on the first take, and that the reason it doesn't come apart is that it wasn't sliced. The actual plot hole with the pizza is that nobody ever gets it down. It's there in later episodes. It's just up there, drying out on a roof in the New Mexico sun, for what by the show's own timeline must be a very long stretch of months. Nobody mentions it, not Skylar, not Walt Jr., not the estate agent, nobody. The remission. Walt's cancer goes into remission at the end of season 2. And he punches a paper towel dispenser in a hospital toilet about it because he's furious because the diagnosis was the permission and the permission has just been withdrawn. Wonderful scene. And then the cancer simply waits. It waits for about a year of story time while he builds an empire. And then it comes back precisely when the plot requires a clock. It's dramatically perfect and medically a bit convenient, and the show is careful enough to never quite give you a staging or a prognosis you could hold it to. Marie Schrader shoplifts. It's established early. It's played as a symptom of a woman with an enormous amount of unexpressed something, and it's one of the more interesting character details in the show. Betsy Brandt is doing a lot with very little for about 3 seasons, and then it evaporates. The kleptomania is a whole thing, and then it's mentioned, and then it isn't. There's a scene of her drifting through open houses pretending to be someone else, which is the best expression of it and also the last real one. A thread that mattered enough to seed and not enough to finish. The dealers. Combo gets shot by a child on a bicycle working a corner, Tomas. And Jesse goes after the men who ordered it, and the show goes to enormous lengths to make you understand that Gus's organization uses children because children don't get charged as adults. And then Gus has Tomas killed to defuse the situation, and Jesse loses it entirely, and it's the hinge of half measures and full measure, which are 2 of the finest hours in the show. I've never had a problem with any of that. I mention it because it's the last time the show is really interested in what the actual drug trade does to actual people at street level. After the super lab, the product goes into a montage. Nobody in the back half of Breaking Bad is a customer. There are barrels and there are checks and there's a purity figure. And the human being at the end of the pipe more or less vanishes from the program. It's just a thing the show quietly stops looking at. Once looking at it becomes inconvenient to the fun. Walt Jr.'s breakfast. Not a hole. But since I'm here, the single most reliable continuity in the entire series is a teenager eating cereal. He eats breakfast constantly. It became a joke, then a fan theory, then a legitimate structural observation because the show does use it deliberately on his 16th birthday and again later as a way of marking time in a house where nothing else is normal. The Fly, also not a hole. An entire episode about a man chasing an insect around a laboratory while Jesse tries to keep him alive. People hated it at the time. It's now widely understood to be one of the best things the show did, and the Fly reappears in Gliding Overall on a table, which is either a callback or a coincidence, and I choose to believe it's a callback. And then there's the one that reframes all of it. The whole show takes place in about 2 years. That's it. That's the span. Walt turns 50 in the pilot on the 7th of September 2008, and he dies on the 7th of September 2010 on his 52nd birthday. 62 episodes, 5 seasons, 6 years of broadcast, 2 years of story. And that number does something to everything I've said tonight, which is why I saved it. Walter White goes from a chemistry teacher who has never broken a law to a man who has built and destroyed a transnational methamphetamine empire in the time it takes most people to change jobs once. He learns the drug trade, gets absorbed into a cartel-adjacent operation, kills that operation's head, builds his own, floods the American Southwest and Eastern Europe with product, accumulates more cash than can be laundered, is exposed, loses everything, and dies in 24 months. Nothing in that has time to be plausible. That's the thing. All the softness I've been picking at tonight, the money that can't be laundered, the lab nobody noticed, the purity in a caravan, the cartel that took too long to notice him, all of it exists because the show is running at a speed that reality cannot match. Reality is slow, investigations take years, empires take decades. Gus took 20 years to build what Walt takes apart in 18 months. The compression is the source of nearly every crack in the thing, and I wouldn't change it. Because the alternative is a 9-season show where the middle 3 are about zoning permits, and the reason Breaking Bad hits the way it does is precisely that it never lets anybody catch their breath, including the writers. So let's wind this up. 2 years, I keep coming back to it. A man gets some bad news on a Sunday, and 24 months later, he's dead on the floor of a laboratory he built and lost, with a bullet in him from a gun he assembled out of a garage door opener. That's not a career, that's barely a phase. I could finish by running back through the whole catalog. I'm not going to do that because you were here and because a list isn't the point. I'd rather leave you with 2 pictures. The first is a revolver on a glass table, slowing down, stopping, pointing at a plant. A man decided something and the camera told you by looking somewhere else. The second is a man in a doorway with half his face gone, adjusting his tie. 19 takes to make a dead man look tidy. Neither of those is a plot hole. Both of them are what the show actually was. And here's what I've worked out over the years of doing this, or at least what I think I've worked out, which isn't quite the same thing. The reason Breaking Bad's cracks are so findable is that the show taught its audience to look. That's the whole answer. For 5 years it rewarded attention. It put a book in a bathroom in 2011 and detonated it in 2012. It made a broken plate the hinge of a man's soul. It hid a poison behind a socket and left it there through the apocalypse. It trained everyone watching to treat every object as load-bearing because most of them were. And once you've trained people to do that, they don't stop when you'd like them to. They keep looking. They look at the gas mask nobody traced, and the pickpocket who couldn't possibly, and the car that arrived too quickly in a very large desert. You built the audience that finds the seams. That's the price of building an audience that finds anything. Nobody hunts for continuity errors in a show that never earned the scrutiny. Nobody's out there doing forensic work on programs they don't respect. The plot holes are a compliment. They're the receipt, and the man who made it is still turning up. That's the bit that stays with me. More than a decade after the last frame, Vince Gilligan will sit down on a podcast and patiently explain one more time how a DEA agent found a patch of dirt. He didn't have to. The show's finished. The argument doesn't need settling. It's just that he's still in the room, and the room is still open, and people are still arguing about a story that ended years ago as though it happened to someone they know. That's not a show with problems, that's a show that's still alive. A few things I'd like to get to, if any of them appeal. Ozymandias on its own, properly, the whole hour, because it deserves a night to itself. Better Call Saul's strange habit of going back and installing the plumbing under a house that was already finished, which is a genuinely fascinating thing for a prequel to spend its time on. And possibly every dumb decision Walter White ever made, which would be a long one, because there are a great many and he was very proud of most of them. Say the word and I'll get one of them started. But that's plenty for one night. Thanks for sitting through it with me. Sleep well.